2008. I started my career as a chemical engineer. I worked in oil and gas. The industry that today is being, everywhere people are bashing it for being the most polluting industry. But that's where I started out my career. I spent about 6.5, 7 years in core chemical engineering. I then decided to move over to the management side. So I did my MBA from IIM Bangalore. Post that, I was primarily into sales. I've worked in different industries, including technology licensing. I've led the sales teams for multiple companies. My turning point was in 2018 when I had my son. So what kind of started as a very small search to understand sustainable diapering options has eventually led me to this point in my career where I'm now an entrepreneur. The whole point of creating this company was to provide people very simple solutions, right? Today, we all live in a world where there is so much of convenience. Everybody does everything for us, and we get everything at our doorsteps, that we find that doing even a small, a tiny little effort seems to be a big waste of our time, even though we spend like hours on our mobile phones. So the whole point of trying to form this company was to create small, simple solutions that are very easily integratable into people's everyday lives, and also to make people understand the importance of having those solutions. We have a lot of people who come by to us and tell us that, it's very admirable that you're doing something in the waste management space, but why should I bother? So the whole point of doing this, and when ma'am asked me to talk today, this was the whole point of trying to do this was to make everyone more aware of where we stand with respect to what we consume and what we waste, and how easy and simple it is to do something that can make a very big impact on a larger scale. So with that, I kind of want to talk about waste management. EcoBan does complete, we provide a lot of waste management solutions. But the primary solution that we offer is in dealing with what we call kitchen waste or organic waste. So we started out trying to find a very simple, economical and very low effort, low maintenance system wherein people can try to take that first step towards moving to a zero waste lifestyle. As someone said, what the world needs today is not 100 people doing waste management perfectly. It's instead millions of people doing waste management, but imperfectly. That will have such a huge sea change in where we are today as the planet, and more specifically as a country. So when we talk about waste management, we have a lot of people come up and tell us that
2:33 पे start हो गई पापा. हाँ. और पहला ही पढ़ा रही है ये अभी. हाँ, पहला ही पढ़ा रही है ये.
I'm sorry, whoever is in there, can you please mute? All right, I'm gonna go ahead. One of the first questions that a lot of people tell us is, we have someone come pick up our waste. Why is this our responsibility, right? So that is why we want to start with talking about why we need this, why we need any solutions at all. And there are quite a few companies coming up in this space which are trying to provide waste management solutions, right? So we need to talk about why we should care. And then I'm going to drill it down to what are the different types of waste we make, how easy it is to deal with certain, how difficult it is to deal with certain types of waste, and go a little bit more into the science of dealing with waste that we generate in our everyday lives. While when we talk about pollution and when we talk about wastes, we think of huge industries and e-waste and all of that. Reality is, all consumption that we do generates waste, and we all generate a lot of waste, right? If everyone consumed and wasted as much as the average American, we would need 4 planets, literally, to provide us enough resources and have enough space to take up all our waste. That's halved for an European. even less for developing nations like India and China, but we're catching up to these consumption patterns. Everywhere, buying things or having that purchasing power and consumption power, irrespective of whether we need it or not, has now become an aspiration. So the developed nations, they've taken up that huge space of polluting the world, and now they want to lecture us. And then the developing nations say, hey, that's not fair. We've not had the chance to do it. So let us destroy our planet a little bit more. So where does this whole cycle end? While it needs to start from where we consume. We need to understand how much we consume with respect to how much we actually need. And while that has become an aspiration, at least the easiest way to tackle this huge issue of how much we keep dumping into our planet is to just repurpose our waste. Garbage handling is one of the huge expenses for most global cities, and most cities don't want to take on this expense. It's expensive, but other than expensive, there are also myriad hazards associated with this, right? Which is why a lot of cities, like say for example Bombay, where I'm based right now, Bombay has now said that we will not collect your waste anymore. They've reduced their waste collection budget by more than 30%. The BMC, which is the corporation here in Bombay, and they say that instead we will only give OC to buildings which already have some sort of way to treat their own waste. We will not collect unsegregated waste, and this is something that a lot of cities around the globe are trying to incorporate and make it as a general practice. Which, okay, then if I talk about this, then I'm like, that's the corporation's problem, right? They're getting taxes from us. So why should I care as a person? Why should I care? There's a lot of reason for that as well. When we think of waste and repurposing and recycling, we know a lot about plastic waste, right? We are fed these images of single waste plastics and how they don't decompose. So people think it's only plastics that are the problem. Realistically, it is not only plastics that are the problem, right? We also dump what is called organic waste or easily decomposable waste into landfills. Let's take India as a case study. We generate about 1.35 lakh tons of waste, residential waste, every day. So that is what is collected. So what is generated is in fact 30% more than that, right? Even the collection itself, we've lost 30% of that waste. And more than 40% of the waste that is collected is actually organic. And people have this mindset that it's decomposable, so it's okay to just dump it anywhere. But reality is, what happens when we dump it is it's going to go into what is called a landfill, right? The whole principle of a landfill is that you dump as much waste as you can into this space. And you have machines like compactors which serve to remove all the air in that space. So you create a space that is packed with waste, some decomposable, some non-decomposable, and there is absolutely no air there. Then you get all your associated problems. We think of the smell that comes from landfills, but most of us are, fortunate enough not to stay next to a landfill. But the smell and the look is not the biggest problem there. What happens is all that carbon that is there in that waste we dumped, it's going to turn into methane. And that's a very strong greenhouse gas. You're also going to have acids leach out from the food that you add, and that is going to pollute your groundwater. You have leachate, which is like a thick black liquid that comes out. I'm sure you've seen it from all those big garbage cans, right? That's going to enter into your groundwater. So we've destroyed the air, we've destroyed the water. What we also do is all this leaches through the soil. So the soil pollution is also now taken care of. But it's not a one-time thing. It does not stop just there. What happens is that the methane and the other gases, the CO2 that is generated in the landfill, it will continue to pollute that area for at least 5 to 7 years. And even after that, the debris that comes from landfills affects the region even post cleanup for up to 50 years. Which means now, you may not live next to a landfill. But India as a country, we are fast running out of landfill space. Most of us live in metros. A recent study says that by 2035, we will run out of landfill space. which means landfills are going to come closer and closer to where we live, right? It's going to affect each one of us individually. It's also going to hugely affect the planet that we leave behind for our generations. Like I said, my journey started because I wanted to leave this place as a, even if not a cleaner earth than what I inherited from my parents' generation, I wanted to leave it at least as I got it to my son. And I think there are a lot of things that we can do. So if this problem is so huge, let's shrink it down to what each one of us can do, right? On an average, an Indian household of 4 members generates about half a kg of wet waste and about a maximum of 1 kg overall per day, right? So what can you do with that waste? Learn to segregate it. Ideally, you should be segregating it into all of these categories you see. You should be separating it into wet waste, dry waste, sanitary waste, and e-waste. We don't do most of that stuff. I mean, let's just be honest. I live in a society where it's mandatory to segregate it, and I live in a society that is filled with officers in the armed forces, and yet 99% of the community does not segregate. The 1% that does segregate, it's not collected individually, right? So don't depend on someone else to deal with your waste for you. But in some cases you don't have an option. You can't dispose of your sanitary waste or your e-waste by yourself, right? You need to send it to the appropriate place, which is very simple. Just mark your sanitary waste. E-waste, there are so many e-waste collection companies. Don't put it into a landfill. You're going to get acids leaching from the battery of your electronics going into your groundwater. Dry waste, again, you have so many plastic and paper companies that can come and pick it up for you. But the wet waste that you make, all your kitchen waste, your compostable waste, you can just deal with it in the comfort of your own home. You don't need a garden, you don't need a lot of space. You can just deal with it where you stay, right? And that is what we want to introduce to all of you. We want to talk about composting, which is one of the key products that services that we offer. So, what is composting? It's a very simple process. It's absolutely pollution free, which converts your kitchen waste, anything that you make, your cooked or uncooked food, into manure. Better uncooked, but you can also convert your cooked food into manure. It's also, I won't even call it a recycled waste product, right? It's an upcycled waste product. So you take your waste and you convert it into something that increases your farming yields, increases your food production, and you give back to the soil from where you pulled out nutrients in the form of food. The best thing about composting is it's a very easily implementable process. You need minimal cost for it. You don't need a lot of investment. You don't need a lot of running costs, especially if you do it individually. And it can solve a lot of our waste management and food scarcity problems. Compost has a lot of benefits. Right? People tell us, oh, I can think about this, but I have no use for it. You don't even need to use it. You don't need to have an extensive garden. You don't need to put it in your own homes. If you create compost at home, you don't know what to do with it. There are a lot of companies like mine where all you have to do is place a call, we'll pick it up from you. We'll come to your doorstep and pick it up from you, right? An even simpler option is just go to your park, whichever is near your house, or go to the trees that are there in your own apartment complex and just dump it next to the soil. That's all you need to do. So the effort from your side is very little, but the advantages that you can get are very, very huge, because compost supplies organic matter to the soil. Compost is made of organic matter, right? Instead of letting the carbon in the organic matter be oxidized into CO2 or hydrogenated into methane, we are going to capture it in the form of organic matter and give it back to the soil. Compost as it's very different from chemical fertilizers. A chemical fertilizer will feed your plant, but compost will feed the soil, which means you can increase the amount of nutrients that the soil has. So the soil year on year will give you the same yield. If you're talking about a farm, if you're talking about your own backyards, it will give you beautiful flowers and fruits, right? Compost, what it does is it makes sure that that balance that is there in the soil with respect to microorganisms is maintained. which a chemical fertilizer can never do. You can keep increasing yields adding fertilizers, right? But year on year, you have to add more and more fertilizer to get the same yield. And as you add more and more fertilizer, the lesser and lesser is your soil nutrients. It's going to mess it up completely to a state where after 20, 30 years, you won't even be able to use that soil. We talk a lot of organic and sustainable farming. This is the simplest and easiest way you can go organic. It increases erosion resistance. So compost as a product has this capacity where it holds a lot of water and it gives the water to the soil slowly. So the moisture content in the soil is maintained for a long time. So you increase erosion resistance, you increase the nutrition retention, and you increase the water holding capacity. If you compost at home or you use compost, even if you don't compost and you just buy from your nursery and put it in your house, you will see that the plants you had to water every day, even in a city like say Chennai, which is so hot, you will only need to plant water once in 2 days. That's how much you can increase the water holding capacity. 1 teaspoon of garden soil to which compost has been added contains a myriad amount of bacteria, which are all useful bacteria, and a number of fungal threads. And I do want to talk a little bit about the nutrient profile of compost, because I want to talk about what this does as what the benefits are of all of these compounds as a product, right? So most chemical fertilizers in the world are based on NPK ratios, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratios. And compost has all three of them naturally. By slightly modifying what you feed your composter, you can easily modify the ratios in here. You can see carbon content of more than 33% that is returned back to the soil. And in addition to all of these, there are a lot of micronutrients that come up because you're using food material to generate this compost, right? So it contains a variety of the basic nutrients. In addition to NPK, it has a lot of micronutrients. You have manganese, copper, iron, and zinc. All of these help to control diseases and insects.
Sorry to interrupt. Madam,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Your slide is not, I think, moving. Can you please check that?
Sorry, so you're not able to see my slide?
Yeah, I can see the slide, but it is still in the first slide itself, waste wise. I think it is not moving. Now it is moving.
Okay. Can you just check it now? Is this okay? Can you see it now?
Now it is moving. Now it is moving.
Okay.
You can put it in the slideshow, and then it will be
It is
convenient
on the
as.
slide. It's on the slideshow.
No, no, Sujata. It was only.
Okay, let me just see if I can. Let me stop sharing and reshare it.
Thanks, ma'am.
All right. Is this better? Can you just see if you're able to see it now?
It's still only in. Not
Okay,
the slideshow.
Let me just go ahead. And...
Now it's there. Now it's there.
Then let me just do it in this mode.
Oh, it went out. Gone back.
It's gone back.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why.
I think you go to view and put it as full screen, then you might get a better above instead of going to slideshow.
Are you able to see it if it is in this mode?
Yeah, it's a little small, so the numbers are a little difficult.
Yeah. I think maybe this is a better option if you're able to see it.
Actually, it's become smaller. It does not
I have no idea what's going on. Is this better?
Yeah, this is okay.
Okay. And I hope it's moving now.
Now it's okay. It's full screen. But the thing is, you come to slide number 7, so we don't know what was there in between.
Oh my God. Oh, I'm sorry. I would be glad to share a copy of this, ma'am, if that's a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I'm just gonna talk about the nutrient profile. I was not aware that you guys were not able to see this. I'm so sorry about that. But primarily, I just wanted to talk about the components of compost itself, right? And what each of these components does. So NPK, which you can see, is at least 2% or lesser in each of these. This is what your traditional commercial chemical fertilizers are made of. But compost does not contain just that, right? It has a lot of micronutrients as well. So these micronutrients like your manganese, copper, iron, and zinc, these help to control diseases in insects. And compost by nature, it improves the texture of the soil and the structure of the soil, thereby enabling better nutrient retention and moisture retention. Compost is not simply something that is about waste management, right? It's not simply a way for us to kind of think about returning nutrients to the soil. It actually solves a lot of what is called the sustainable development goals that the UN has come up with and most global countries have adopted. So there are about 17 goals where the nations of the UN together have realized that it's not possible for you to have what we call industrial expansion without pulling all strata of society with that, right? So there are about 17 goals that they've come up with, which are called sustainable development goals. Of which there is a lot of affordable clean energy and all of that. So one of the most popular SDG that India has committed to has been the electric vehicles, right? All vehicles on the road will be electric vehicles by 2030. But that's not the only SDG that we are targeting towards. And composting actually helps to solve more than, I won't say solve, but it helps to achieve a lot of these sustainable development goals. For example, no poverty. The very fact that compost can be a substitute for your chemical fertilizers or can greatly reduce your dependence on chemical fertilizers means that it's going to greatly reduce the cost of farming. So, and we are all aware of the situation of farmers in our country and how their entire livelihood depends on every yield that they get. And reducing that cost of making food goes a long way in helping to bring down poverty. The second one is zero hunger. When you have soil that can sustainably keep giving you the same yield, and you can reduce the amount of effort and cost that goes into it, that is going to contribute towards zero hunger. It's very important to think of cost in terms of what the UN sees as people who are poor, right? People have less than $1.25, less than 150 rupees a day, who earn less than that a day. When you are cutting down a huge amount of their expense, which then trickles down to their day-to-day funds, it goes a long way in eradicating both poverty and helping us move towards food sustainability. Good health and well-being. I mean, both of the first two goals of no poverty and zero hunger tie together to help us satisfy this, right? And the biggest SDG that composting allows us to achieve is sustainable cities and communities. There are multiple cities and communities which can very easily benefit from composting. Because what composting does is a perfect circular economy. You take from the soil, you use it in one way, whatever is left from your usage, you return it back to the soil, which means you're replenishing it. You're also, on the other hand, reducing the amount of expenditure that this community has to do on taking out that waste, which means whatever has been saved can be pumped back into the community and help have further development. Composting is the perfect example of having a circular economy. And it's not recycling, because what happens today, and I think most of us are now being bombarded with this greenwashing that most companies do, right? Everyone tells you that, oh, we've reduced our environmental impact by this much, because they want you to think that you're not doing as much harm as you were previously. But it's also very important for us to understand that being sustainable means adding value to whatever you're recycling. So when you take a plastic bottle, you crush it and you form a bench. the value of the plastic, in fact, actually comes down. And here you're taking something that you're just going to dump, and instead you're making it into a valuable product. So you're upcycling. Responsible consumption and production. I mean, there is, I don't know how more to harp on this, but what composting does is by enabling us to push back whatever we were previously wasting into the soil, we help to eradicate global food waste. One of the SDGs is to halve global food waste by 2030. And by composting, we can actually do this. So wherein you are reducing the gap between how much is produced and how much is actually being consumed. Even if it is not directly consumed as food, you're now providing another arena where it can be reabsorbed into the economy. Climate action. It seems far-fetched, but just hear me out. We talked about the effects of organic waste going into landfills, right? Where you get all this leachate causing your groundwater pollution, causing your land pollution. When you compost, you eradicate more than 90% of the pollution that is caused by dumping organic waste into a landfill, which means you have cleaner water bodies, you have cleaner soil, and you're also in a way sequestering the carbon. You're trapping the carbon and returning it to the soil, thereby reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that are being produced today in waste dumping facilities. And it helps life below water, because if you're able to reduce water pollution, you're going to increase the quality of water, not only for our consumption, but also the quality of water in our seas and rivers. And finally, life on land. When you have a piece of land that can keep giving you sustainable yields year on year, that is going to reduce the amount of land that is then deforested to make way for agriculture or food cultivation. What this then lets land be in its natural habitat. And by improving the quality of that soil, we are not only talking about the big, the macroorganisms, right? We're also providing sustainable environments for microorganisms, which in turn are going to help our flora and fauna flourish. So composting is not just about waste management, it's about sustainable development. Having said all this, what happens actually in composting, right? So you have microorganisms. You have a natural process. You have something that is decayable. A microorganism, a bacteria or a fungi will eat it and will decay it. And what we are doing instead is controlling that process. We are controlling the process so that the desirable effects are more. We are reducing the undesirable effects, and we are also reducing the time taken to do this. There are two main microorganisms that are involved in composting. You have your aerobic and your anaerobic microorganisms. Most composting is handled by bacteria, right? That is the biggest contributor to composting. And aerobic and anaerobic it's self-explanatory, right? It's just either decomposition in the presence of air or decomposition in the absence of air. We want to focus more on decomposition in the presence of air, because that takes care of a lot of issues that today we face with waste management. So the mechanism is that there are three phases that composting goes through. Any decay, in fact, goes through these. But there is what we call a mesophilic phase, when the activity is just building up, right? The bacteria starts decomposing your material, and depending on whether there is enough air that the material has, the bacteria will either take it to will either do aerobic, or the aerobic bacteria will all die if there's no air, and it will become anaerobic. So when we talk about aerobic decomposition, first you have what is called the mesophilic phase. It is going to start getting a little hotter, and it's an exothermic reaction. It is going to be heat that is produced when the decomposition happens. Then you go into what we call a thermophilic state, where there is a lot more temperature increase. If any of you have composted at home, if you put your hand inside the bin, which by the way, it's perfectly safe to do. If you put your hand inside the bin, it will feel hot, right? Even like I pull the example of Chennai because I am from Chennai and I forced my dad to compost as well. But even in a city like Chennai, you put your hand inside, you will feel the heat, and you should feel the heat. That means your compost is working very well. So this thermophilic state is the major contributor to the decomposition, right? Here is where most of the disease-causing bacteria, pathogens which are in the rotting food is actually destroyed. So this high temperature is required for the compost to be safe. Once this is reached and hits a certain peak, the thermophilic action then slowly goes down into what we call the mesophilic state. The temperature goes down. Here you have certain mesophilic bacteria that then help to decompose the tail end, to do the tail end decomposition, right? So what actually looks like your picture on the left, which is all your food waste, you can see eggshells, your plant peels and all of that, actually becomes like the picture on your right, and that picture on your right is actually my compost bin at home. So you cannot see any of your source feed stock in it, right? It looks, feels and smells just like potting soil. So fantastic, now we've looked at what happens. So what do you actually need to do this composting? You need just very basic things, right? First is you need good microbes. That is your work crew. They do the bulk of the work for you. And to keep them happy, you have to make sure you add enough food. In addition to food, you have to make sure that the conditions are right for them, right? We don't like to work if there isn't an AC and if there isn't a coffee machine. Similarly, you have to provide certain facilities to the microorganisms. So the first one is adequate air, and I can't stress this enough because air is very important if you're going to do this in your backyard and you don't want it to smell. You need to have a little bit of moisture and you need to have a little bit of warmth, right? We'll kind of break down each of these. Aerobic composting is what we aim everyone to do because it takes out your odor issue, it takes out your leachate issue. It actually produces very high quality compost, and it produces heat, which means a lot of your pathogens are destroyed in this process. While you can depend on what is naturally available to help you to decompose your waste or compost your waste, what we would suggest, especially for a starter, especially for someone who's in an urban setup, who's never done anything like this, is to go and procure a good composting culture. There are a lot of it available in the market. I'm just going to plug in my companies as well. But there are a lot of cultures available in the market. And for beginners, we always suggest these cultures because what we have done is an extensive amount of research to understand what are the issues that people face in urban setups and how can we then manipulate the mix of microorganisms within this culture so that those issues are taken care of. So for example, now anytime you do composting, the culture should have bacteria, should have actinomycetes, it should have fungi, protozoa, rotifers, and enzymes. And we look at each of these in a little bit of detail. But what you also need to make sure is that if you have those issues, there are a lot of our tier 2, tier 3 cities, most of our villages where people do composting, right? They'll dig a pit, they'll drop all the waste in there, and that will naturally attract earthworms and they will vermicompost it. Not really possible in a city because it requires a lot of careful tending, right? So to make it simple and to dumb it down for anybody to use, I have been composting for just a year now, and I knew nothing about composting before this, and I do it, along with my son, who I keep pulling because he's been the biggest inspiration for my company. So I do it along with him. It's that simple. And the reason we suggest a culture is so it just makes it easy for you. But there are multiple ways in which you can kickstart your composting journey. The first most important of your microorganisms in any culture is your bacteria. They make up 80 to 90% of the microorganisms which are in a gram of compost. They are responsible for most of the decomposition. They are responsible for the heat generation. They also, depending on the conditions that you have provided, the type of decomposition is also determined by the bacteria that you have. Most of the bacteria that we use are bacillus. You do have two types of bacteria in a composting culture. Initially, you have the mesophilic bacteria, and then you have the thermophilic bacteria, which take over once the temperature increases. The next one that you have is the actinomycetes. So here what happens is compost smells just like fresh earth, right? And that characteristic earthy smell is caused by these organisms. They look like fungi, but they're actually filamentous bacteria. They play an important role in degrading your complex organics, the proteins, the cellulose. These are the ones that work a lot on your drier material and the tough to break down material, like the stems that you add, your newspaper, dried leaves. All of those are acted upon by these. Most of them are active during the cooler curing phase. Then you have fungi. So these are again responsible for a lot of the complex breakdowns, and they mostly live on the outer layer of compost when the temperatures are high. So in fact, I think 3 months back we had left one of our compost bins out in the sun, when we came back and opened it after a month, it was filled with the fungi growing in, right? Because they were in the perfect, it was the perfect condition for them. But that's how fertile your compost can be. And then protozoa and rotifers, they are not greatly, they don't play a great part. They just play relatively minor roles. There are a few things that they help to break down. Earthworms, if you do physical decomposition, earthworms are one of the most important things you can have. If you find an earthworm anywhere, just put it into your compost bin. I mean, they ingest organic matter and they provide this really fertile casings behind, which are tremendous for helping to improve soil fertility. And these castings are actually rich in plant nutrients as well. And they provide a lot of bioavailable nutrients to the plants. So now that we've talked about your work crew, what is the conditions for your work crew, right? First is temperature. Your active composting occurs at around 15 degrees C to 60 degrees C. Obviously here we don't have 15 degrees C in India, except in a few regions, but from room temperature to about 60-65 degrees C is when your active temperatures happen, right? So you might have some piles which go beyond this temperature, which is not good, and we would actually suggest to take active measures to reduce it. But I'll touch upon that when we talk about the troubleshooting of the process. But about 60 to 60, I would say about 55 to 60 is the optimal temperature conditions. And if your pile is getting that hot, that means the activity is going on in there, right? So, question that everyone says is, does it have to be hot? A lot of people in cities have problems with this because the feedstock may not be good, or they just live in a place where it doesn't get hot at all. What happens when a pile never gets hot is that the decay will be slower, right? So it will take longer to make compost. And given the fast-paced world that we all live in, we want to accelerate this as much as possible. There could be other reasons that are causing your pile not to get hot. And it's important to have a right mix of all the conditions, because if it's too much water, you will drown out your bacteria. If it's too little water, the bacteria don't have enough to thrive, because then the temperatures go so high, they again die, right? They're a little pricey like that. But what having a good enough hot pile does for you is that you get to kill all the pathogenic organisms. You kill most of your weeds, and it's actually very rapid composting. The second condition is aeration, right? You want to ensure adequate aeration to your pile. And which is why you will see a lot of commercial composters you see in the market will have like a tumbling design, or will have some mechanism to introduce air into that mixture. And if you have a good ventilated system, the hot air going out will actually pull in cold air from outside, right? Relatively cold in a country like India, but the cooler air is richer in oxygen. So it's important to have enough aeration so that there's enough air circulating, not just around your pile, but also inside your pile. And so that is where I want to touch upon next, which is about the aeration. So your pile cannot be one dump, right? If you dump it, it's going to become just like a landfill on a very small scale. So it's all going to just compress down. There's going to be no air going inside. Air will only touch the outer surface, and it's going to start stinking, right? So porosity is important to make sure that you have enough aeration inside the pile. And if you find that your pile has just drastically dropped in volume, that means there is no porosity in there. So then you have to do something to introduce air into that mixture, because believe me, even if you don't open it and see, it will start stinking in 2-3 days. So you can insert sticks. Simplest solution, especially if you're in a city, take a paper, just ball it up, crunch it, and throw it in. Don't tear it into small pieces. So that scrunched up paper actually has air trapped between those layers. You can introduce sticks, or perforated pipes. In fact, perforated pipes is something that we prefer to do when we do composting for, like, say, a whole society. One of our recent designs is for about a small town which creates about 2.5 tons of wet waste in a day. So for that, our design has a stick that goes through the composter, right? That makes sure there's enough airflow within the pile to make sure that there is lesser odor and leachate issues. The third thing is water. You need to make sure that there is an optimum water content, because if it is too dry, the bacteria will die out. If it is too wet, again, you will drown them out, because then it will just collapse and it will become anaerobic. You should have about 40 to 60%, right? Which as a scientist or an engineer sounds nice, but how do you know that? Simplest example is you take your pile and you squeeze it. You shouldn't get water dripping out, but it should feel moist to your hand, right? Then you know that you have enough water. You're not drowning it, and at the same time, you're not making it too dry. So if you think it's too dry, or you think your compost looks powdery, and it's not, it doesn't look like it's changing form and shape, which you will see when you compost. Your feedstock will all start losing their form. They will start disintegrating. And if you find that it's too powdery, you can sprinkle a little water. Don't add water like what I've shown in the picture here. This is only for like huge commercial piles, but you can sprinkle some water. And if it's too wet, then you have to add what we call browns. And I'll touch upon what we call browns in a little while. So now that we've understood the science behind all of it, let's look at how simple it is to compost, right? It's as simple as 1, 2, 3 Maharaja Mixi. 3 steps: understand where to put it, what to put in, and that's it. Third step is your bacteria will make the compost for you. So since we talked about aeration and we talked about temperature, we would always suggest that you put your bin where there is a lot of there is some amount of aeration. So I live in Mumbai now, which means we have actually a lot of apartments which don't even have balconies. So in fact, my co-founder, she has her bin right in her kitchen. That's how good our product is, by the way. It doesn't smell, there's no liquid that comes out, and it's safe enough to keep inside your house. But we would always suggest keep it where you have some circulation of air. So if you have a balcony, that's like the perfect place to keep it. If it can get a little bit of exposure to sunlight, that will actually accelerate your composting process. You have to be careful in your very hot cities to make sure that it doesn't dry out all the water. But it's a good idea to keep it in a place where it gets, a couple of hours of sunlight a day. It'll accelerate the composting process. You cannot expose it to rain. The minute you expose it to rain, your bacteria will get drowned out. You will go into anaerobic decomposition, and it will start stinking to high heavens. So you have to make sure that it doesn't happen. And if it doesn't, you can just put a tarpaulin on it or something like that. So once you've decided where you're going to keep it, you always start with the bottom layer. You have to add some dry leaves or coconut husk. And we always suggest start out with a composting culture. If you don't want to go out and buy what's in the market, which I would strongly recommend people to do, initially at least, until you understand how to compost, right? Because we always compare composting to riding a bicycle. There are a lot of things that you need to remember, but then over time it just becomes second nature to you, right? Like when you drive your car now, after driving it for like 2-3 years, you don't think about consciously changing the gears, constantly checking your rotometer and all of that. You just, it becomes intrinsic to you. You understand what your vehicle requires. Composting is the same way. But to start off, it's always good to have a place where you can learn from before you go in, because what happens is people will get very enthusiastic, and we saw this during the lockdown. People get very enthusiastic about doing DIY things, right? So they'll tell us, we don't want to buy your bin. You teach us how to do it. And we did a workshop where we taught people how to do this using diluted buttermilk. We warned them. We said there will be leachate coming out, and the process will be slower. And they say yes, yes, yes to all of it. And then 1 week later, they'll be like, oh my God, it's not composting. Or oh my God, it's stinking. So I would suggest use a commercially available culture. It doesn't have to be only from Ecoban. It can be from any of the companies that you see. But it's a good starting place. So now that you've placed your bin, it's very important to understand what you can and can't put in, right? Any compost feed actually starts with what is literally color coded. So we have greens, we have browns, and we have what we in Ecoban call reds. Reds are what you should never add to your bin. So when we talk about greens, greens are things like vegetable peels, your fruit waste, coffee grounds. I know coffee ground looks brown, but it's actually a green. And I tell you why it is important to understand what is a green and what is a brown, right? All your grass clippings, any plants, plant clippings if you have, do not put deceased plants, but if you're cutting out your rose plants, or you have all your pujaka flowers and all of that, all of those come under greens. What greens do is to provide moisture to the compost, and they provide the nitrogen. Then you have what we call the browns. So browns are things that are typically, think of browns, think of things that do not have a lot of moisture in them, and actually help you to absorb the moisture. So you have cardboard. We are all buying from Amazon and Flipkart, right? Throughout this lockdown, and especially with the big billion day sale coming up. Use that cardboard. If you have cardboard that does not have any shiny layer on top of it, you can absolutely compost that cardboard. It's a very good brown. It will take up a lot of moisture. It will take longer to decompose, but it will decompose completely. So you can use cardboard. You can use the egg cartons, right, which come out of recycled paper. Those are good to go. You can put normal scrunched up paper, even if it is printed on, because most of the printer inks that are available today are safe to go into your compost bins. And all your fallen leaves. In fact, what I do here in Mumbai is I ask our housekeeping staff to give me one full sack of dry leaves every 3 months, and I just use it in my compost bin. I mean, they're very happy to give it to you. It's free of cost, and it's an excellent brown, right? What browns do is they actually they don't compact down like your greens do. So they'll provide you a lot of fiber, they'll provide you a lot of carbon, and they'll form air pockets. So they're very important for good aeration. And there is a reason we talk about browns and greens, because good composting happens when you have those in the right mixture. Because greens decay very rapidly. They are the ones that provide the bulk of the organic matter. But at the same time, they adversely impact your aeration. Greens have a tendency to just disintegrate very fast and compact down. So if you put only greens into your bin, it will stink. Browns, on the other hand, they decay very slowly. So they keep the pile aerated for a lot longer, especially if they are like, rough browns. The problem with putting only browns is that they will tie up nitrogen in the soil if they are not fully composted, which is why you need to have them in conjunction with greens, because then they supply nitrogen. And you always need to make sure that you have an adequate mixture of the two. You will find a lot of, out there in the market, you will find, just if you Google, they will tell you different ratios in which you have to put browns and greens. Some will say put 2 parts browns to 1 part greens. There is no hard and fast rule. Like I said, it's like learning to drive a bicycle, right? So you add some, you have to look at your pile. And when I say that, people immediately get discouraged. They say that we don't have the time for this, and it's a very it's taking too much time. So we actually did a study, right? And we found out that if you use one of these commercial bins, it takes 2 minutes of your time in a day, just 2 minutes. And sometimes you don't even have to compost every day, especially if you have lesser people, right? You can let that garbage collect over 2 days and then put it in. 2 minutes, that's all it takes. But people, we like to act like we're so busy that we don't have those 2 minutes. But anyways, pulling back and coming back to this, it's important to learn that balance. So now that we've talked about what we can put in, let's talk about what we can't put in, right? In a compost bin that you keep in your garden, we would always advise you not to put in cooked food. And there are two reasons for that. One is that the minute you put in cooked food, if you put in meat, it will decay slower and it will also attract rodents. You will get rats and other insects coming to your pile. The second thing is that we add oil and salt to our food, right? So if you add salt, you're going to mess up the pH of the soil. It's going to make the nutrition absorption from the compost greatly reduced. So we always suggest do not put cooked food. Now, when we do large scale bulk composting, like when we do it for like an entire society, we see that people will add cooked food irrespective of what we say. So we have developed additives that help us to break it down, but a good idea is to not put cooked food inside. If you have excess, please give it to someone who's around you. If you're not comfortable doing that, feed the crows, the birds in your area. My dad lives in an area of Chennai which still has cows, so he feeds the cows. But we always advise don't put cooked food inside. Do not put deceased plants. The pathogens will live over in your compost, and you always run the risk of ruining your plants by using that compost. And do not put animal feces. I know they are technically biodegradable, but please do not put it in them. They will harm your compost. They will harm your plants as well. No dirty nappies. Do not put human or animal waste inside the compost. You can put your hair, that falls off, and you can also put your nail clippings. They take a little longer to break down, but they do break down. You have to be careful about how much leaves you put in. Like I said, you have to learn to strike that balance. I know we're talking exclusively about kitchen waste, but you will not believe the things that people put in the wet waste. So please do not put anything that cannot degrade. Do not put in plastic. Definitely do not put in batteries, chemicals. Don't empty stuff into your compost bin. All right. And we do have some people recommending that you put wood ash or lime. These are things we do not suggest to put in. Lime, because it promotes the odor issues, so you will get that rotten egg smell if you add lime to your compost. And the wood ash, it does add some potash, but we've seen that it actually creates the odor problems again. So we have browns, greens, and reds. And that's pretty much it. Just making compost just is making sure you have certain things in the right mixture. So make sure you have the right mix of greens and browns. If it's too wet, add more browns. If it's too dry, add more greens. You can add up screwed up paper. You can add a lot of dry leaves, cardboard, all of it to ensure aeration. You have to turn the pile every 5 to 7 days. So once a week, we suggest just take a small gardening rake or something and turn it. That way, even if you messed up somewhere, this will ensure that whatever rubbish was inside will get enough exposure to air. And during the first few weeks, the temperature will rise. When you start your bin, you will see that for the first week, there isn't enough material that has added up inside the bin, right? So it will take a little bit of time to kind of heat up, and it will rapidly heat up once the bin is at least there are at least 4-5 days of garbage collected in there. And after about 4 weeks, you will see that even if you turn, it will not heat up. So the temperature will be lower. The compost will be cooler to the touch. So once that is done, it is actually usable right away. But we would suggest that you keep it aside for about 4 weeks. and then start using it on your plants. So when will you know if compost is ready? It will look exactly like the picture you see on the slide. I hope you're able to see it. But it will be dark brown to black in color. It will be crumbly. It will be loose. It will absolutely smell like earth after the first rains, right? That's the exact smell that you will have. You should not be able to see any of your plant peels, your vegetable or fruit peels. Some seeds take longer to decompose. Eggshells take longer to decompose. You can add eggshells in here. Please do not add the egg whites, yellows inside this. And you will see that as you leave it to mature, it will keep compacting down. So it will, if you generate about 30 kgs of waste in a month, ideally you will have only 10 kgs of compost left. So it will shrink down to about 1/3 of its original volume, right? Now we add this here in all the workshops that we do, simply because there are a lot of misconceptions, and we see that the biggest challenge to getting people to compost are these misconceptions. People think something even though they've never tried it, and so because of that they will not try something new, right? So they say it's too complicated, and I've run you through the process. I don't think it's complicated. There's nothing that we need to do. Nature is taking care of everything. It's just a few tweaks here and there that we need to do. So it's a easy, natural process, right? It takes too long. This is something we've heard, and it could be true in certain types of composting. Vermicomposting, for example, takes longer. Because it's about natural process and something that we use, in bulk, and we have earthworms work on the waste. If you use aerobic composting with composting cultures, you get ready to use compost within 6 weeks, 8 weeks at the max. Um, the first thing we all think of when we think of waste is it's dirty, right? And it smells. It's dirty even though we were the ones that generated it. It's dirty even though it's just a part of the food that just went inside us, but we still think it's dirty, and it smells. It will smell if it's anaerobic. If you don't have enough air coming into your pile, it will smell. But if you do it right, your compost has a beautiful earthy smell. It's perfectly safe. You're not going to have brown liquid running all over your house. You're not going to have rodents, none of that. So that is the next thing that people come up with, that it's going to have a lot of pests. It's going to attract pests. It's going to attract rodents. Only if you compost in open bins, and only if you don't add any measures. And if you add meat and cooked food, yes, you will get rodents. But 99% of the time, if you compost correctly, you will not get pests or rodents in your compost. The other thing people tell us is it needs a lot of space. This is an argument that we run into over and over and over again here in Mumbai, right? So much to the fact that we've actually created a even smaller compost bin to tell people you don't need space. You do not need space for most commercially available composters, the home composters that are available in the market. Our bin takes up a foot of space for the bigger bins. The smaller ones are even smaller. You don't even need a foot. The other thing that I want to talk about is centralized versus decentralized waste management, right? A lot of people come to me and they say that we don't want to do this in our homes. We don't have the time for it, even though it's 2 minutes. And we want to do it for our overall society, and especially most societies these days, they have this huge amount of blocks, right? 6 blocks, 7 blocks. There are like 1,000 households in the entire complex. You can do it. We have technologies for it. In fact, we do offer those services. A lot of companies in the country offer centralized composting services, but there are a lot of pros and cons to that. When you do centralized composting, waste collection for that matter, what happens is the transportation costs are tremendously high. And I can tell you this as a person who is doing this, I can tell you that it's cheaper to have 1,000 individual bins than it is to have one centralized, composting plant. But people never think of it that way, right? There is a lot of maintenance and operation cost that goes into it. While we have developed technology that has relatively reduced the amount of operational cost, it has moving parts, so it's going to have a lot of maintenance requirement. And you have waste that is going through it. So anytime leachate is created, it's very corrosive. It's going to corrode your moving parts, right? There is no maintenance required for home composter. Literally no maintenance. All you need to do is you need maybe one running cost that you will have is maybe once in 4 months, 5 months, you have to buy a small additive brick. Our additive brick retails for about $350. The cheapest one you will find will be somewhere around 250, 300 rupees. You'll need to spend that once in 3 months, right? But look at the other side, you are generating compost. So if you're an average Indian household, you will generate about 15 kgs of waste, right? Which will go down to about 5 kgs of compost. If you go on Amazon, you click compost, it will retail anywhere from 15 to 70 rupees per kg. So just do the math, right? Whatever you sunk into both the bin and the brick, you will recover in a maximum of 8 months. And post that, you will make profit, believe me. But people don't like to think of it in that way. They look at that initial cost. Reality is it's higher if you do it in a centralized way. It also requires more specialized skills, right, to operate and maintain a central composting unit than it does in a decentralized one. You do need mechanization and to accelerate for example, our own bulk composter, we have a shredder up front. Then we have a composter which needs to rotate every hour. We have a blower, to insert air inside the mixture. We have a carbon filter so that the air that we pull out is filtered and comes out. There is a lot more pollution that happens with a bulk composter than a home composter. I say labor intense here, but realistically, it's not even labor intense. It's very simple. You don't need a lot of space requirements. A centralized unit will always need a space requirement. You will need to put a shed on top of it. So there is always, more investment that goes not just into your composter itself, but also the associated costs, right? You have to put up a shed. And every time we go to a society here in Bombay, first they will tell us we want to do it centralized. We have housekeeping team. We want to do it centralized. Then they will ask us how much space do you need. So we tell them, right? Then they'll do calculation. They'll say that is the parking space for like a car or 2 cars. I will get 1.5 lakhs for that. Why would I give it to you? And then they're like, let's, most builders will then be like, we will just buy these compost bins and, supply it to the people ourselves. That is cheaper for us. So that is how simple it is. And I think more and more cities are starting to realize this, which is why there is a lot of push towards, for example, again, I take the example of Bombay because I'm based here. Now, BMC actually offers a 5% property tax rebate, right, to societies that can prove that they don't send their wet waste out. And I think more and more cities will start adopting this model. You have to incentivize people to do it, no other go, but it's also an absolute necessity. Also in centralized composting, you get lower quality of compost. Bulk compost always has lesser beneficial organisms, simply because there is poorer separation of waste. What that also adds to the cost is that because people don't separate well enough, you need to have another segregation unit upfront before your composting unit. When you put it in people's house, right, they think of the fact that they invested some 3,000 rupees into the bin. They'll be very careful about what goes into the bin. And contamination really is minimized. In both places, you can take it wherever. There are a lot of opportunities. A lot of governments, state governments actually have programs where you can generate city compost and sell it to farmers at predetermined prices. So there is no lack of avenue for where this compost can go, which is another thing that people come up with always. They are like, oh, I don't know what to do with the compost. I don't have a home garden. just go drop it in a park or call us. We'll come and pick it up from you free of cost, you know. Now that we've kind of gotten the big picture and then the micro picture of what you need to do, we want to give a few tips out to people who might be interested in starting this journey. First thing that people will always come up with is odor. They say that, you know, there is like a rotten egg smell or it smells very bad. That means your pile is not getting enough air or it's too wet. So what simplest thing you need to do is turn your pile nicely, add a lot of browns, and you know, let it work its magic. Again, an ammonia odor is when there are too much of greens, and just add enough browns. Simple as that. It's not even, I mean, it's not even worth calling this troubleshooting, but these are the most common problems that you will face. And then you talk about low pile temperature when it doesn't get hot enough. That happens in a few conditions. One is if your pile is too small, it will not heat up immediately. It needs a little bit of, you know, volume before it starts heating up because it's decomposing everything. If it's too cold, and also if it is too rainy, if it's too humid, the pile temperature does not increase very fast. And we faced this. In fact, we've done slight modifications to our additive to account for monsoons. And also, if there isn't enough aeration, your pile will not get hot enough. So greens that provide the heat, right? So you have to make sure that there is enough greens that go in. And you have to make sure that you keep turning the pile. And if you have too high a pile temperature, you can, if you're interested, you can Google and see compost piles on fire. Usually it doesn't happen in like your kitchen piles, but it does happen when you have these huge gardens, right, where you have a compost pit. That's usually because the pile is too large and it's too dry and there isn't ventilation inside. Having said all that, I do want to do a small company plug. I want to introduce EcoBarn to all of you. We are 3 co-founders who founded this company with the idea of building tailor-made solutions which are low maintenance, low cost, low effort. And we have a very robust product development that has gone in. We've done a lot of research. We've done a lot of product designing. And we're also a set of co-founders who have, one of our co-founders has about 30 years of experience in environmental engineering. So I've done, you know, chemical engineering, and then I've done sales as well. We have one more person who has a lot of city planning experience. So it's a you know, company that is born out of passion. All of us kind of decided to take a different path, and believe me, sometimes when I see my pay slips from before, I think, what am I doing? But this is something that is giving us tremendous joy when we are able to help people find solutions that they can, you know, very easily use. So I also want to introduce our product. So this is the current product that we have. We have another one that we're going to launch around Diwali. We call it the Eco Bin. It's an aerated bin. It's an engineered bin that makes sure there is enough air circulation through the system. We provide you a simple starter pack, which has a brochure that tells you what to do and not to do, a small rake to turn your pile, an additive. And these bins are made of polypropylene. They're sunlight resistant. We have a lot of questions with respect to why we're using plastic in this. The life cycle of this bin is at least 10 to 15 years. It's sunlight resistant, and we find that this is easiest for people to transport. It's easiest for people to handle. It's also lightweight, which has been a request from a lot of our clients. So how does it work? It's as simple as this. We'll give you a brick. We'll tell you how to decompress that brick. So this small brick translates to about the equivalent for 3 months of additive. You spread a small layer of the additive at the bottom of the bin. You throw your waste on top of it, spread it evenly, and then you put a small layer of the brick on top of it, close it. That's it, right? You keep repeating this over and over again. And we do suggest you get 2 bins. So once one is filled, you just put it in the bottom, put the bottom bin on the top, and let the one in the bottom keep maturing. and after 4 weeks, you have compost ready to use. This is the team. I'm Sujata. I've been yapping for quite a bit now. Vaidehi is our product development, product design, and urban infrastructure expert. And Lalit is our product development expert. So this is us. This is where you can reach us. We'd be glad to answer any questions. We'd be glad to help you kickstart your composting journey. And we really don't mind if it's through our product or through something else that you are doing. We are happy to help you through with this. And I think, we would like to encourage all of you to go ahead and explore our products. You can use our voucher and get a discount. Even otherwise, we would be glad to answer any questions that you have with respect to composting now or even later, and these will be our contact details. I think I am done. I would like to open for questions. So anybody has any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Are there any questions from the participants? Sujata, I'd just like to know, just suppose you have something like a farm, okay, farm, where you get most of dried leaves or wet leaves maybe. Can you compost that also?
Oh yes, absolutely. You can put a small composter, or you can actually put a small pit. You can build a small pit, and you can drop all of your leaves, dry leaves, wet leaves, doesn't really matter. You can drop it in them, and if you do not have a lined pit, you will get earthworms attracted towards the pit. So they will start eating it up. It will be a slightly slower process though. You can accelerate that process as well by adding a few cultures.
By adding?
A few culture, a little bit of composting culture.
Those bricks that you mentioned.
Yes. So in fact, we will tailor make it a little bit for you depending on how your ratio is. It would require us to actually get an idea of what you want to put into the pit, and accordingly we'll tailor make it a little bit for you and suggest dosing for you.
But how do you prevent it getting wet?
Ma'am, usually if you're doing a pile, we would still suggest to have it under a shed or something. We would not advise you to have it out to the open.
Okay. Anybody else likes to ask any question?
Excuse me. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Mubarak actually.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. So you mentioned that we can have it both fresh and then dried for the composting, but the product is not as much same as when we are using dried material, because when we are using the dried material, it will be in phenolic content will be very high than the fresh one. So how it can be?
So we would always suggest to have a mix. If you have one and not the other, your composting will move towards anaerobic. If you have only browns, which is only dried leaves, husks, it will take longer to compost. That's one thing. It will be drier. It's your greens that provide the heat and the moisture. So you need to have a mix. If you do not have an enough mix, then we will need to examine what you want to compost, right? And accordingly suggest solutions to you. For example, we are doing a project for a small town, right? And they're only giving us what we call greens, which is basically food waste. There actually we're suggesting to them to add a certain amount of sawdust and also certain amount of additive as well as dry leaves. So you will need to have that balance for it to compost out.
Yeah. You referred a mix. What do you mean the mix here?
A mix of greens and browns, and we would suggest to add some cultures, composting culture.
The ratio you are telling, right?
Yeah, so the mix of greens and browns will depend on what you generate, right? If it's a household, you will be primarily generating only greens.
Yeah.
It will be mostly kitchen waste. If you have a garden, say for example, you will get both greens and your browns, just your dried leaves, your flowers, and all of that. So then it's easier for you to compost those. Your compost will actually take off better. If you're only doing household waste and you don't have a garden or anything, then you have to think of what else you can add to that mixture, like say paper or cardboard and things like that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So your onion peels are wet or dry?
They're actually wet, ma'am. The same similar to coffee grounds. They're actually a green.
Dry, right?
Yeah, they are very light, but the thing is, it will be a green.
Oh, it will be a green. Okay.
Yes, it will provide moisture when it starts decomposing.
Madam, good evening, madam. I am Dr. Loganathan.
Yes, sir.
Madam, is there any way out to generate energy from the waste? Because as you are talking on so many avenues of utilizing the waste, is there any thought process from your domain that we can generate energy?
So there are ways in which you can generate biogas from waste. There are a few restaurants in Mumbai who actually have incorporated that. It does come with a little bit of associated issues with respect to safety. You need to have enough measures, you need to have enough real estate for those safety measures. But we do have a few restaurants which are actually using their own waste to generate biogas. There is, in fact, Tata Institute of Social Studies here in Mumbai, where they use their canteens food waste to create biogas, and they use it again in the canteen. So biogas is usually what is being used at this point.
Thanks.
Biogas generation, there are facilities that create biogas from residential waste.
So I think if you are transforming the waste into energy, then it adds a lot of value to the waste.
So that actually depends on how much is the usage. Unfortunately, I don't have the data with me, but I'd be glad to connect with you offline and give you information on that. We do have a technology that makes biogas, but it's something that at this point of time we are not focusing on. But there are definitely institutes that do it. I think if you research on the Tata Institute of Social Studies, it's a very good case study for generating biogas from the waste itself, and they reuse it within their complex itself.
Thanks, madam.
Sujata, which one composite is much more suitable for generation of NPK?
I'm sorry, sir.
Also, which one composite or waste you have used for the generation of manure, or which have more nitrogen and phosphorus contents?
So nitrogen actually comes from your greens, right? So it naturally comes in from your greens and it makes it available to your compost. We do not see, unless you very carefully curate it, home compost does not have that capability to adjust the amount of nitrogen of NPK basically, to adjust the ratio. But when we do bulk composting, we do add additives. Sometimes if there is a specific requirement, we add external additives to the compost to bring it up to the NPK that they want to look at. But typically it will be about 1 to 1.5% of NPK, a little bit higher for nitrogen, but about 1 to 1.5% it will be for each of these. About 1.8 for nitrogen, 1.25, 1 to 1.25 for phosphorus and potassium.
Are the additives chemical in nature or biochemical in nature?
No, ma'am, they're biochemical in nature. They're basically microorganism cultures. They're bacterial cultures which are mixed in with a little bit of cocoa peat. And sometimes, depending on if it is going to be completely for residential use, then we add a little bit of sawdust. The sawdust is an inert. All it does is help to soak up the moisture. They are not chemical in nature.
Anybody else has questions? Yes? Vinod? Kumar, do you have any questions? No? Can you hear me? Or is there some connectivity
I
problem?
think there's a connectivity issue because I think he started saying something.
Sudesh Kumar, have you asked your question? You're muted.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I got it.
Okay. So if there is no other questions, then we can thank Sujata for giving us a very enlightening speech, talk about how we ourselves can, especially since we are not living, I mean, if you have space at home, you have available space, then you can always make a good compost out of the vegetable waste that you normally throw into the bin, and maybe use it for your plants that you grow at home and keep the place much more greener. So invariably we tend to buy all the compost or vermicompost, whatever, because the sand will not have sufficient nutrients. But if we can do it in our own, then I guess it would work out very well. So I thank her once again for accepting to give us a talk on what she is working on. It also for youngsters, if you're thinking more socially minded, then it also gives you venues of where you can look up to work, especially in your own regions. So thank you, Sujata, once again for
Thank you, ma'am.
for
It's been an
spending.
absolute. It's a little surreal for me, but it's been an absolute honor and pleasure, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'd be glad to connect with anyone offline if you have any questions. And there is a lot of money to make in this as well. I mean, I'm not so good that I only want to save the environment. There's a lot of money to make in this as well. So anybody who's looking into environmental engineering and product development as a career, it is a very flourishing career right now. So I hope this has helped you guys to kind of get a little bit of idea of the different kind of things that are going on right now in the country on waste management. And I'd be glad to connect with anyone. You can just if you have any questions, you can go on our website and chat with us, or drop me a line at info@ecoban.com, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Okay, Sujata, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So I think we have done for today. Okay. Tomorrow we'll start early in the morning. So I request you, we have 3 talks tomorrow. The first one is a person who has a very long association with water treatment and desalination. So he will be giving you the talk. Actually, he is currently based in Indonesia, but he's willing to give a talk to you on whatever he's working on, basically on water treatment and I mean maybe desalination. Then the afternoon talk will be uh, based on plastic pyrolysis, so much more academic in nature, um, by Professor Hira Lal from IIT BHU. So he'll be talking about pyrolysis of plastics. So how to get energy from waste plastics, I guess. Then the third topic will be by Professor Vinu from IIT Madras. So again, an academic talk which will enlighten you about what would be uh, you can also pick up points to see if you can do research in those fields. So tomorrow, one of them is an industry person, and two of them are academic. Okay, IIT BHU and IIT Madras. So I think we'll close for today, and we'll meet. Try to come early by 9:30 because you should appreciate that he's going to talk from Indonesia, and it wouldn't look nice if we come by 10 o'clock for a 9:30 session. So I would request you all to join by 9:30. At least he will be happy that he's talking to a number of people. Okay, thank you. Have a good day.